They take their kids places they're not supposed to take their kids. They say things they're not supposed to say. Again, me repeating myself. Parents are not perfect. And we also probably let our kids be around growing up some people they shouldn't have been around. Maybe taking them to a church we shouldn't have taken them to, and they got an influence there. I mean, just because it's church doesn't mean it's good. Real talk. Maybe they watched something that we shouldn't have let them watch, but we let them watch it, or go to a movie they shouldn't have. I could go on and on and on. But those parents that gave trauma or caused trauma to your life, those parents had trauma to theirs from their parents. It's kind of like a generational thing. It's just a difference of how tolerant the next generation is of the trauma, or how understanding, or how compassionate. It feels like that the more the generations have gone on, the less tolerant they are of trauma of someone else's past, especially family members. They get more of, you should have known better, or you're not accountable, or you won't admit, or you're not sorry. You know, it seems to run into that. And then it's like an epidemic of estrangements that have come out of it. So many conversations I've had with my therapist about it, and it's really sad. It really is sad. The family unit doesn't mean the same, but we really do learn what we see. We do. We learn what we see. Part of the reason that I think some of the estrangements in family happens is because people let it. I think a lot of people don't stand up when they see something that shouldn't be going down. They don't say, hey, no, we're not doing this. Instead, they sit back and, well, you know, I don't want to deal with the drama, or I'm too old for the drama, or I just don't want to get involved. But then the same class, in the same breath, the same folks will also say, well, I don't understand, or I don't like it either. I don't agree with this or that. Well, which is it? You standing up for it, or are you going along with it? You know, it's just, but yeah. So anyways, I'm going to go in my next video and get a little more entailed now about my trauma growing up. So let's get on to that. Sometimes we have to go backwards to move forwards. You're going to have to excuse me for a second. I'm going to adjust this camera just a tad. There we go. Anyways, sometimes you do have to go backwards to go forwards. And what I mean is you've got to go back to where your trauma started so that you can actually deal with that stuff, and then you can move forward. Myself, my trauma started when I was about 6 years old, around 6 years old. I loved the home we lived in. It was really nice. It was in a great neighborhood. If you know me personally, you know where that neighborhood was. You know what town we all grew up in. If you're watching this and we went to school together, or you're a family member, you know. I loved that house. I loved my bedroom in that house. I loved that my brother was right down the hall. We were crazy. We would army crawl to each other's rooms. It was so much fun. I loved that we'd play school with our stuffed animals, you know, and we'd have cousins over and they'd play board games with us, and, you know, things of that sort. And I loved that house. And we had a tent, and my dad would pitch tent in the backyard, and it was so much fun. It really was. It was a lot of fun. And it was great up until about 6 years of age. And when I say that, I was sexually assaulted when I was 6 years old. We used to put a tent in the backyard. And I'm being very vulnerable here. This is not something that I would normally, you know, just divulge out in public. But you know what? There's so many people dealing with it, and there's so many people hurting. And it's not just women that get sexually assaulted. Men do too, or little boys do too. It's not just little girls, it's not just little boys, it's not just women. Men do too. So I'm not going to put it all in it just because I was a girl box. But I'm not going to go into great detail about it. I'm just going to tell you that a friend and myself, being little neighbor girl, decided to camp out in a tent, and the neighbor boy came over and assaulted both of us. And it was traumatic for me, a very traumatic event. I'm not going to go into real big details of things that followed with that. But yeah, I can tell you that that neighbor boy was much older than us, like 18. And he did end up going off to the service. And I have since, I have since seen him, and it literally makes the hair on my back of my neck stand up. I don't like to see that, but I can tell you that that was very traumatic for me. It made me feel like that I was not worth anything. It ruined all of my innocence, and life for me just wasn't the same after that. For whatever reason, I felt very, very unloved at that point. And it was very, very a dark place for a 6-year-old to be. I was very insecure when we moved from that house into a new farmhouse. I was very, very insecure. After that happened to me when I was 6, it did happen to me again after that. And I was still under 10 years of age. And it was very heartbreaking. And I actually, in my mind, started thinking that that's how you're supposed to interact with other people. That everything was supposed to be sexualized for some reason. That was normal then. That was okay. And it wasn't. It was not okay. It just wasn't. It wasn't okay at all. And it wasn't okay that I actually felt like that was what was put before me. I shouldn't have had to go through that. And then moving into a new farmhouse and feeling very insecure there. And I know my brother did too, but I had to change schools. And that was traumatizing because I didn't know any of the kids. I had grown up with these other kids, you know, from kindergarten. And now 4th grade comes, and it's like a big year, you know, 4th grade, 5th grade. But it was 4th grade for me. And I walk in, you know, 2nd semester to a room full of strangers. And I didn't know these kids. And to be completely honest to you, the school, when I walked into it, they weren't real friendly. It was a country school, but they weren't real, I don't know, welcoming per se. The children weren't. And that was sad to me too. They seemed kind of snubbish. There were a few girls that were kind to me, but most of them looked down their nose, and it was really sad. And a child should never have to go through that, nor should another child have that disposition. I'm going to tell you right now, if you have a child in school and they look down their nose at other children, that's your fault. You've influenced them. They have watched mom and dad be judgmental and looking down their nose at other people. Literally look down their nose. That is because of something that you have said or done in front of your kids, and they think that they have the right to make themselves high and mighty. So, or you're letting them hang out with people that they shouldn't be hanging out with. All parents do it. Again, trying to tell you, parents, we aren't perfect. We do end up letting our kids do things they shouldn't do, and it does influence how they grow up, or how they view things, or how they interact with the world afterwards. But anyways, yeah, that was a very, very hard time for me. And then going into the 5th grade, it was a hard time. You know, you always have these junior high years, and they're not so great either. But I can tell you, I also grew up in a home where I had a father that had PTSD. And let me tell you, the trauma of his life, very, very justified as far as how it affected him. Even my mom, she had trauma in her life. I mean, you know, her mother died when she was a little girl. And then, you know, she had a dad that worked all the time. And they just kind of got tossed around. And, you know, and my dad's parents were kind of like absent a little bit. And, you know, the way the silent generation raised the baby boomers is that children were seen and not heard. And they didn't really put the attention into them, a lot of them. Not all the baby boomers, or not all the silent generation, but a lot of them didn't put the energy into their kids. Probably they should have. And that, the baby boomers learn the same thing. And then you have us Gen Xers that kind of come in, and we have parents that are working, and we're basically spending time at home and living off of, hey, here's a note, get this done, and all that stuff, it comes together in its own traumas. And when you have parents that, they're working with what they have, doing the best they can, they're still causing some trauma to their kids. And in my case, like I said, I'm not going to get like deep into it, but I can tell you, if you want to know the deep, gory details, pick up my book. I go in a lot more detail in that than I will kind of in the podcast, because I want a floor to be not just about me, but about others, and allow others to talk, not just me. But I can tell you that I've had plenty of trauma in my life. And the whole thing with being sexually assaulted literally drove me for male attention, which made me want boyfriends at a younger age, which drove me to whatever I could do to get that male attention. And a lot of girls do that. That's not just like me. And I'm aware of that. So a lot of girls, and I did that. I looked for the guy. I looked for, anybody that gave me attention, and I always ended up with, I'm not going to say that every guy I was with was bad, but I'll just say that there was a lot of immaturity there, maybe not ready for relationships, and it just wasn't good. We weren't good for each other. And, and it continued. When you aren't healed and you get with someone else, and their trauma comes and your trauma, and you're trying to make a relationship, and nobody, knows what they're doing. And my first marriage, I was so young. He didn't know what he was doing. I definitely didn't know what I was doing. My first child was already born, and then here we have a second child, and we were young. So yeah, you have all these factors that come into play, but all those things, more trauma. If you don't have proper support around you, more trauma. A bit of advice, because most of the baby boomers are out of this advice now, but they really should have had somebody give it to them. But as a Gen Xer to other Gen Xers, if you have grandkids, you're not their parents. Let their parents parent them. It doesn't matter if you don't like something that your kids are doing. It doesn't matter if your grandkids are complaining to you about stuff. You want to go have a conversation one-on-one with your kid, like, hey, little Bobby said blah, 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 blah. I just thought you should know. That's one thing. But a grandparent needs to stay in a grandparent's lane. It's okay to love your grandkids. It's okay to take them out, to spoil them, but you're not their parents, nor should you ever step in that lane, because you are stepping on your own children's toes. And you have to remember, if you wouldn't have wanted it done to you, don't do it to your kids with your grandkids. But yeah. Everybody should always learn their place. A grandparent stays in a grandparent lane, and a parent stays in a parent lane. So that, learn your place. But anyways, yeah, you just over time, more trauma. And that, my first marriage didn't work out. And then, here I went diving into another relationship. And again, that whole thing where I'm just grabbing for air because, I so bad want, that the male attention that I am looking for that's caused from this childhood, trauma. I'm sorry, I keep fixing my straps. I probably won't wear this again. But when you live in Florida, it's really hot. So, you wear stuff that's works. But, I went through all these different things and more trauma. And here with my own kids, then I have my own kids. And I'm not healed from that trauma, the past trauma. I go into a second marriage and I'm not healed. And honestly, my second husband had his own trauma that he wasn't healed from. So now you have two people going together. And it's like plutonium. It's just tick tock, all the time. And on top of that, you're trying to blend a family at the same time. I'd never done a blended family like that before. And here we go. And it's more trauma. It just keeps, it's like as you go, you just keep picking it up. And at that time, I was going to therapy. I wasn't really doing anything to actually mend or heal or fix or anything, which, I really should have, because my two oldest kids took a lot of brunt of a hit from that. And I mean a lot. There were so many things that I should have said, so many things I should have done, so many ways that I should have protected them more. And I'm not afraid to admit that. The level of accountability that I take for that is more than what they will ever know. Because when you face that inside, when you really have to face that, you have to face yourself and the things that you did wrong, that's when you start understanding. That's when you start changing. And, my older kids, my two little girls, they deserved better than that. They deserved better than what I gave them. They shouldn't have had to worry about certain things. They shouldn't have had to be protective over certain things. They shouldn't have had to feel insecure or unsafe or anything. I should have stood up and said, hey, enough's enough. And I didn't. But I thought I was doing right. And most parents do. Most parents think, okay, I think I'm doing the right thing. But hindsight is always 20/20. You make the mistake, and then all of a sudden it's like, and what we don't realize is you can sow a seed and what we don't realize is we can sow a seed at 16, but then it doesn't come to fruition until like we're 22. What does it matter? If you made a bad decision at 16 and it comes back around to bite you at 21, 22, you're still responsible for the repercussions of those actions. So even if I screwed up when they were 10 or 12 or 15 or 17, and it hits me now at 50, I'm still responsible for the repercussions. You don't get out of that. People think, oh, well, I'm not that bad. It won't happen to me. I'm better than them. I hope you're right. I don't know what else to say to you. I hope you're right. But we don't get to dictate whether or not we hurt our kids or didn't hurt our kids. But let me touch a little deeper on that. You also don't get to dictate whether you hurt your parents or didn't hurt your parents. You don't get to dictate whether you did or didn't hurt anyone. And the truth of the matter is, now that I've been through everything, now that I've experienced all this different, traumas and things in my own life, and, then I reflected these things, my kids had to experience this, especially my older kids. And, now I don't really have a relationship with them. And it's sad. It really is sad. I can honestly say I am estranged from my two older kids. I don't get to see my two grandchildren. I've been confronted and said, you're not taking accountability. You're not sorry. The problem is, with that kind of statement, I am sorry. And I've been sorry. I've been the ball of tears. I have cried many a nights. I have hit my knees many a nights. I've sent lots of emails. I've sent texts apologizing. And after doing all that, you know, I had one of my children actually set me at my parents' house a few years ago, actually set me on their front porch and was waiting for me to, you know, come out and say, I'm so, so sorry. Well, I had already been through sending the emails, I'm sorry, the text, I'm sorry. This specific child of mine, I actually saw her in Walmart before I moved to Florida. I actually broke down in tears and I hugged her.